And in today's two-part episode, I sit down with the outstanding Kristin White. She hails from Bermuda. She is an entrepreneur, an activist, a philanthropist, and a family woman. We actually discuss everything from Bermudian culture, history, politics, and the cultural landscape of what it's like to be Black and from Bermuda. I hope you enjoy.
So my shop is called Long Story Short. So there was a bookshop. I live in the town of St. George's, which is the eastern part of the island. It is the oldest continuously inhabited English town in the New World. Sorry, my cat being crazy. But yeah, so it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has incredible architecture that dates back to the 17th century. So I'm obsessed with St. George's. I think it's the best part of the island. And so when I moved here in 2003, I immediately fell in love with this little store called the Bookseller. It was in the cellar of a historic building and had been there since 1979. And so in 2012, it was closing down at the bookshop. A lot of businesses in St. George's were closing because we were mainly a cruise ship town, and the entryway into the harbor here is really narrow. And so the cruise ships weren't able to fit anymore once the industry, rejigged the size of the ship. So we went from being a cruise ship to port with multiple ships in every week to nothing. And so a lot of the shops closed, a lot of the businesses closed. And so this store that I loved was going to be a casualty of that. And I just couldn't bear to see it close. I'm an avid reader, writer, and that was my little shop that I pop into all the time. So I bought it so it wouldn't close down, basically, in 2012. And then over time, I shifted it from being solely a bookshop to being a shop that was more reflective of all of my interests, everything from, yes, books, but also social justice issues, environmental justice. I do a lot of work in Bermuda around like racial equity. And so for me as well, I tend to read Black authors. And so I did a shift to primarily only carrying Black female authors. And I added tours. And so with all of those new additions, I was like, the name didn't really make as much sense anymore, the Bookseller. So I changed the name to Long Story Short. And so it's a retail store, but I also have offer my history tours from there. So we've got gifts from around the world, work with a lot of social enterprises, fair trade artisans, local makers. I make custom hula hoops from there, and I carry a locally made skincare line called Salt Spray Soap. So it's just a cool like reflection of my interests. It's like the Kristin gift shop is what I sort of I think about it.
Absolutely. No, that's dope. That's amazing. And so, as you mentioned, social justice, and it's funny because every interview that I have, one name comes up, Kristin White, every single time. And so they're like, yo, you got to talk to Kristin, You're talking about Black, you're talking about Bermuda, you're talking about, racial equity, and we're talking about social justice. She is your resource in terms of what the landscape really, truly looks like. And then, and I really just want to kind of dig into that because when I initially thought about Bermuda, I didn't think of rich Black history. Upon visiting Bermuda, I found out there was so much beautiful Black history and so much culture that I had never really, I just never tapped into. I was thinking either cruise ships, Bermuda Triangle, or
shorts and grass,
right, or Bermuda shorts, right? But we talk about the landscape of Black history and Black culture. Like, so let me ask you this question. What does Black history and Black culture in Bermuda mean to you? And I know that's kind of like a loaded, it can be a very long question, but I mean, I'm interested to hear I'm interested to hear about you and your passion for it.
Yeah. I mean, Bermuda's a Black country. And so, unlike, I guess, in other, parts of the world where Black people are the minority, that's not the case here. Right. So I don't even think about Black history. It's history. It's our Bermuda history. When the English arrived in 1612, within 4 years, enslaved African people arrived in Bermuda. Bermuda is actually the first English colony to be part of the transatlantic slave trade before what would become America, before Jamestown, Virginia. So the history of Black people on this island dates back to the beginning of this island. There is not a part of life, culture, art, history, food, architecture that has not been influenced by people of African descent. So for me, it's not a separate entity. It's not a separate history or a separate culture. It is Bermuda history. It is Bermuda culture. So I'm passionate about it because I'm Bermudian. This is my home. I'm a Black Bermudian. And so, anything to do with life here in this island that I'm obsessed with, my island, I love it. Anything that helps me to understand the history of my island more, the culture, how we are, where we are, who we are, how did we get to this point in time? That's why I'm so interested and excited about it, because then that helps me to also be a part of creating a future. Once we understand, once everyone understands and has that deep connection with where we've been, we can collectively create a place for where we will go. And so that's, why I'm so passionate about learning more about the history.
Yeah, was there like a turning point or like a switch that flipped you? Like, you know what? I love being Bermudian, and I need to tell this story.
I think for me, it was definitely purchasing my shop, moving into the shop. So where my store was before, and it was in the cellar of a building that was built in 1752. So the building is National Trust property, and I'd sit in my shop and look up at the cedar beams and think, did one of my ancestors carve those beams? A lot of the times when we're looking at historic buildings in St. George's and in Bermuda generally, we're telling the story of the rich white merchant enslaver maybe who lived there, and not necessarily we don't know the names of the builders. We don't know the names of the women who worked in the kitchens and the people on the grounds. And even not knowing their names, we can still honor their contributions and acknowledge and recognize the contribution. So for me, that was definitely what got me really excited and interested in learning more about Bermuda history. I think similar to many other places, you'll find that even if you learned history in school, maybe you didn't absorb it, or maybe it wasn't even the history fully or more comprehensively. So I had a basic knowledge of Bermuda history, but definitely did nothing in depth. And so being in that historic building, and also thinking about the fact that, I was a Black-owned business in that building, and there had been a Black-owned business in that building during the American Civil War. A Black man named Joseph Rainey escaped America and came to Bermuda and operated a barber shop in that building. He ends up going back to America and becoming the first Black man elected to the US House of Representatives, the second Black man in Congress. So just sitting there and thinking like, oh wow, like I'm connected to this man in this way, this incredible man. He had a business in this building too. So for me, it's always been about connections and to those stories. I've always loved Bermuda, but moving to St. George's was also a key part of falling in love with the island that much more. And that happened in 2003. So first I fell in love with St. George's, just the place, the beauty, the charm. Then I learned about the history. I think over the last 2 decades, I would say, has really been my awakening into celebrating my Bermudianness and really leaning heavily into learning as much as I can about the history.
Wow, no, that's deep. I love that because, it's interesting, Mr. Rainey, so I went on a tour in Bermuda, my first time out, and went on 2 tours. Went on the Enslaved People's Tour with the Jala, and then I went to, it was, I don't want to say a generic tour, but it was a tour provided by the tourism board. Older white gentleman, really nice. And he showed us Mr. Rainey's barbershop and everything like that. So now as you say the names, it's like, the lights flash, and it's all making sense. These are aha moments I really love because, again, for me, it's like, I want, anybody who visits Bermuda to have these like connections. Just like you said, like, I love that you love the connections that you can make with Bermuda and culture and history and Blackness. And then so, question for you, what is it?
Can I pause 1 second? My computer is having an issue. Let me just pull it up.
No worries.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I was like, I might as well get water and do this and, you know.
No, you're not wrong at all. You're not wrong at all, as a matter of fact.
Okay. There we go. All right. Sorry, so you were saying you did the tour.
Yeah, I did the tour, and it kind of like opened up my mind to, and especially given the last 2 years that we've had, right? As Black people, I was doing the tour in the city of Hamilton, and through that tour, we went to a church, and that church had a graveyard. There was like half the graveyard was people, Black people, the other half was white people, soldiers, things of that nature. The one with the white people, or the half that had the white people, was really big, and like had big graves and tombstones and things of that nature. And then over on the Black side, I noticed that graves were like clustered together. Some of them were like mad short. I was just like, what the heck? And I asked the tour guide, and I said, sir, question for you. He's like, yeah, what's up? And I was like, these graves, were these like adults? And he was like, yep. I was like, okay, cool. Were they like regular or full size adults? He was like, yep. I was like, okay. And so I'm waiting for an explanation as to why the graves were so short and why they're so close together. He's like, all right, moving on. And he just pleasantly started another portion. And I was just like, something's not right. And then he also went on to tell a story about one of I think it was a town center building where 12 slaves built it by themselves. And he's like, these men were so committed, and they were, da da da. And I was just like, something's up. Like, what's going on here? So I began to start asking questions about the landscape of Blackness in Bermuda. And this isn't, of course, I mean, every country that has indigenous and or Black people in it has a history in the past that's definitely spotted and or unpleasant, right? So this isn't like anything to shade Bermuda or anything, because I'm from the US, it can't get no worse than this. So so I was just like, all right, so there's more to this social justice and this piece of being Black in Bermuda. What does that actually look like? And I noticed that Bermudians are very polite. They know it, they acknowledge it, but don't really like acknowledge it too much, type of thing. What does that really look like in Bermuda?
What does what look like? Sorry.
The conversation, I'm sorry, that's a great question. The conversation about like about slavery and about social justice and being Black in Bermuda.
I guess it varies and goes in ebbs and flows in different times. Like you said, over the last year, after the global, racial reckoning and uprising, I think it reinvigorated some of the conversations here. I definitely did for me personally. So that's what led me and a number of other Bermudians to form Social Justice Bermuda. And so our platform is very much about having these conversations about how systemic racial inequity and gender inequity and other, things are baked into Bermuda's systems, similar to as you talked about with the United States and everywhere around the world, right? So there's a way that racism or misogyny and represents or manifests itself in day-to-day conversations, but we're more focused on how it is baked into the systems in which we operate. And that's where I think comes that disconnect, right? Because in Bermuda, you're not, we don't have very often those types of interpersonal conversations where you're like, was that a racism? Like, we don't have that. We don't really have that as frequently. Like, it happens, of course, but we don't have where, in the United States, what I see in the United States, where there's people being recorded, telling you to, go home or speak your, we don't have that level of vitriol in an interpersonal space. Where it manifests, though, is in economic, you're being economically stagnant as a community, being, having a criminal justice system that, disproportionately impacts Black people here, an education system that doesn't necessarily create or give our Black students the foundation that we need for success. So those are the different issues that, you know, from a social justice standpoint, those are the different conversations that we're having. You know, yes, we have the one-off things that, you know, okay, that person, you know, you want them to be held responsible for saying or doing something racist or sexist, but the larger and longer term goal is an anti-colonial view. It's wanting Bermuda to no longer be a British colony, for us to be able to shape our own laws and systems, and to shape it in a way that creates a more equitable society for the inhabitants of this island. So that's I mean, I don't know what other conversations or how other people, but where we are with Social Justice Bermuda, we're sort of done with the conversation, and we just want there to be action around these very actionable items. So, you know, making sure, for example, making sure that there is as much resources in legal aid as there is in public prosecutions. But yeah, so for us, it is, for Social Justice Bermuda, it is about looking at, you know, those systems, you know, criminal justice system, cannabis reform, things like that, that are, as you said, disproportionately and negatively impacting Black Bermudians. You know, there is also some conversations around reparational campaigns, reparational initiatives that need to take place. So we put out a very detailed platform that went through it, and we gave it to any member of parliament or person who wishes to be a member of parliament that wants to run on our platform. That's, you know, we're happy with that. We just want someone who is, you know, who will be able to be in a position of a decision-making position, a power position, to understand that these are issues that need to be addressed. So yeah, I think, you know, we've had a lot of conversations over the years, and it seems like through the work that we're doing now, I feel optimistic. I see as well the same that happened around the United States and other parts of the world, where the racial reckoning led more sort of economic institutions to put diversity and equity and inclusion, you know, put a renewed focus on that. And, you know, hopefully that also does something, plays off. But, you know, for us here, it's something that we've been talking about now for over 400 years. So
yeah, it's about time, right?
It's time.
No, that's deep. And so what does the progress look like for these movements, and particularly in Bermuda? Have you seen support coming from your local government, and have you seen the groups, the support from the communities? Have you seen that like growing as well?
Yeah, I think people are definitely, you know, wanting to be part of the conversation, and then groups that had been doing the work, because obviously Social Justice Bermuda, like I said, we're new, we just were formed last year, but there was another group, Citizens Uprooting Racism in Bermuda, that had been around for quite some time. And, you know, it was almost as if because they had been around, people had stopped listening to what they were saying. So I think the uprising, you know, shed light on the great work that they've done. It increased people becoming members and joining their board. For us as well, we got a lot of interest, you know. And I think it's like anything, right? When the first time as it happens, when we're in the streets and we're marching and we've put out our sign, like, you've got this renewed energy. But when it comes down to sitting and being like, okay, this is what the long work looks like. This is what the long climb will be. I think, you know, people are not as willing to take the lead in that. I think there's still amount of people who are like, yeah, okay, I'll join and I'll do this. And it's like, okay, yes, we need workers, but we need leaders. We need people that are willing to, you know, put their face out and say, I'm a part of this group and I'm calling for this, this, and this. You know, in a small community like this, that's not something that a lot of people want to do. So even today, we have, you know, people on our committee who are anonymous. So, you know, obviously we know who they are from an organizing standpoint, but they may write the press release, but they're not going to put their face to it, or they're not going to, you know. And you know, I feel quite lucky in that I have been able to, through the support of my family and what I do as an entrepreneur, been able to carve out a life for myself that is rooted in social justice. So everything from the business that I have to what I do in my spare time. So it's not something that's going to negatively impact my business. I mean, I know that I might not get certain like jobs because of it, but I know that I get more, but I know that I'm also finding my tribe because I'm vocal. And then, so that brings other opportunity, if that makes sense. So the opportunities I don't get are just not for me, right? And I'm very clear on that with how I've set up my business as well, is that, you know, when you go onto my website for the shop, for the tours, it's very clear of who I am and what my values are. So you're not going to choose to come on a tour with me if that's not your vibe. You know, I'm not getting, you know, the MAGA hat wearing folks coming off and coming in my shop and being like, I want to do a tour. Like, no, they are self-selecting out. And I made that decision to be very, you know, and that it made sense for me and for my brand to be who I am politically in my store, in my tours, with everything that I do. Not everybody can do that, right? And so I understand that completely. I would never tell somebody that that's what they should or have to do. So for me, I view it as a privilege that I can be who I am politically, what my values are, that I can represent that in what I do economically, and that I have the support of my family, my husband, for, you know, if it don't work out, I'm not going to be homeless. You know what I mean? It's something, you know, Bermuda has a very long history of civil rights activists being targeted, having their mortgages pulled by, you know, the white run banking institutions. You know, one of our most well-known sort of acts of the act that desegregated the country, the people that were involved in it were anonymous up until like 10 years ago. And that happened in 1959, right? So there is a long history of, you know, activists in Bermuda understanding that it could negatively impact your livelihood. And that's around the world, you know, but here in this tight, close-knit, you know, where you're raising your head above the parapet, it can have an impact. And so I don't, you know, I understand people not wanting to take the lead in these spaces, but that's what we need, is more people willing to take the lead in these spaces. Because, you know, people get tired of hearing the same voices all the time, and they want to hear from different viewpoints, and, you know, understand how everybody involved came to this spirit of activism. And I understand it not being as straightforward as that, as being able to step forward, but I long for a time when it's just reasonable to expect that if you're, you know, someone who has this particular view, that you don't have to shy away from sharing your progressive, you know, radical, leftist, whatever, you know, views. So
absolutely. No, that's real, and that's very important. I mean, and I think that, and it's so interesting, right? So I come from a position of where you can, you know, we had our rallies, and we were able to still be teachers and be at the rally. We were able to be bankers and still be at the rally. And I recognize it, as soon as you say it, like, it's very important for us to understand, like, people in Bermuda don't always have that pleasure, right? Don't have that luxury or that privilege of being able to be completely vocal about their culture and their heritage, or even their beliefs as a whole. Right? And that's deep. That's really deep.
And you know, it is what it means to be a very small place, right? Bermuda's 21 square miles, and everyone that you've, you know, gone to school with, your whole family is within 21 square miles. So balancing and managing that, those relationships is, you know, also a part of what you do as an activist and as an entrepreneur, and as, you know, all of these different things. You're managing all of those relationships. You don't necessarily have that freedom to just move in every way that you want to move. There is no anonymity unless it is complete anonymity.
Right.
So if you step out of your house, people know where you're going. So it's just something to manage. And I think for the most part, for me personally, I view it as a gift. I view it as this gift that all of these people know who I am, and for the most part care about me, even if they don't agree with me, right? To have that amount of energy, positive energy around you at one time, I view it as a gift. But it is also in a lot of ways a pressure, a heaviness that everybody knows who you are and what you're doing, and which is why Bermudians travel so much, for just those like brief moments we can walk down the street and not have to be like, hey, hi, hey, just to walk down a busy like Brooklyn street and not have to meet anybody's eye or see, just it's amazing. We don't have that here. And I haven't been off this island since December of 2019. So I'm feeling, it's little rock fever now. But yeah, that's something that it plays a part in how every Bermudian moves. It plays a part in how every Bermudian moves. So, I don't judge any person that chooses to be like, you know what, this country is expensive. It's hard enough living here. I'm gonna do my job and go home and take care of my family. And I'm not gonna be out here, saying down with the queen,
Right. Well, you know what? What I love about what you do is that there's more than one way to say that too. So, for example, your tours, right? And so your tours. So I'm mad I didn't get a chance to go on with you. So when I next
you were kicking it with the homie, I love Ajala.
Yes.
Ajala's book in my shop, actually.
Oh, really? Dope. No, he's phenomenal. I just had a great conversation with him earlier this week, and he's just mind blown. And and of course he speaks so highly of you as well. And he talks about everybody says you have to go on a tour with Kristin. You have to go on a tour with Kristin. So what does a tour look like with you without giving all the good stuff away, without giving all the gems? What does a tour look like?
I mean, I like to say that my tours and the trips that I curate for Bermuda, that they are, Bermuda experience is rooted in storytelling. So at the heart of it all, I view myself as a storyteller. I've been writing since I was, 5. So my desire is to get people excited about the history through stories. And so I focus primarily in St. George's. And so the tours focus in and around where my shop is, which is, as you were mentioning, you had been to where Joseph Rainey had his barbershop. My store is literally just beside that. So I moved from here to here. So I moved from one side of Barber's Alley where he had his barbershop to the other side of Barber's Alley. So yeah, in and around that area. So I'll, take guests to these important historic sites and connect the dots with them as well, from, the beginning of sort of the settler colonialism era to, what that looked like around emancipation and into the civil rights movement of Bermuda. And then also, I think it's really important as as a person living in Bermuda today, and as an entrepreneur and a person who's living here now, to also connect the dots to where we are now, and for a town, what that means. So how the town has evolved over the centuries through industry. So from the maritime industry into cruise and tourism into where we are now. So a lot of parts of my tours, I also like to take guests into other shops, introduce them to the entrepreneurs and the artisans who are helping to create a new economic ecosystem for the town today. This is, as I mentioned, a town that has struggled economically, struggled to find its footing, like as a brand. Like, are we a historic town that's focused on, museum and history and that's it? Are we an artsy, vibey, town? Are we foodie? Are we food? And it's this ongoing evolution. And so and I've been a part of that conversation now for about a decade. At one point I was the tourism manager for St. George's, so I was sort of leading the conversation or being a big part of leading that conversation. So the tours, I like to have it encompass all of it. You know, the town of St. George has been, you know, a living, breathing, vibrant place where people have lived since 1612. And so what does that mean? And how did that look in every century? And how do we want it to look over the next 20, 30 years? So that's sort of, I guess, what I do from a history and tour point. But I've also expanded to include like for more experiences. So yes, we'll do the history tour, but then we'll hop on bicycles and ride around the coast, go to the beach, get some food, you know, get samples from different restaurants in St. George's. So it's a bit of a food and history tour. I've also been partnering with another tour guide who's a forager. So we'll do history and then some foraging and have lunch at the beach. And when I've curated longer itineraries, so multi-day trips, you know, I come out of St. George's. So generally I'm in St. George's, but, you know, when I've got people, if I'm hosting a trip that's longer, we come out of St. George's and I'll spend a day, you know, focusing on the arts of the city of Hamilton, going into the shops there. So I'll do a Black-owned store tour in the city of Hamilton and take people to meet, you know, because the city is a different beast. It's the capital and it's like the financial district. It's the expensive district. And so there is not a long history of Black entrepreneurship in certain parts of the city. So being able to say like, okay, on this block, you know, this is Front Street. This was where the 40 Thieves, which was like the white oligarchy, they owned all of this. And now to be able to say, and this is a Black-owned business here, and this is a Black-owned business here, you know, it's important to be able to show that evolution of Black entrepreneurship and engagement in Bermuda's economy. So we'll do that. And then, you know, depending on, again, the nature of the trip, we've done boat days. We've done the trip that I'm doing for No Madness coming up in May. We'll have a day. The theme of their itinerary that I created for them is actually called Create. So using Bermuda as a muse, you know, using the beauty and the history and the culture as inspiration for creative inspiration, creative endeavors. So there'll be a day of like photography. They'll be doing a mural. They'll be doing like just cooking and making drinks, so anything around creating. So I just like generally I focus on history and then I build out from there, because there's no part of this island that I don't know and love, really.
That's amazing. And so, and if my memory serves me correctly, through having a conversation with Adela, he said that the storyteller also called the Jolly. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, it's called the what?
Jolly.
Okay, I think in different languages there's different things. So sometimes griot or.
Yes. Okay. Cool. Griot. Okay. Cool. And so, what is your favorite story? What is your favorite story to tell? I've heard of Mary Prince, but I know you probably have Mary Prince and 5 trillion others.
Yeah, but Mary Prince, it always comes back to Mary Prince. Really? She is the well from where we all spring. So. You know, there is none of anything that we can't talk about Bermuda's literary tradition, Bermuda's civil rights tradition without the story of Mary Prince. So everything that I do is in hopes of being in honor of her. Like everything that I do is like, is it something that I can look to and say this was an ode, an homage, and something that was worthy to say that I am doing that I was inspired by her to do it. So she is the beginning, the end, the alpha, the omega for me in terms of what inspires and drives me. And I have, in addition to the shop and everything I've mentioned, with my longtime friend and writing collaborator, Aisha Townsend, we formed the Brackish Pond Literary Collective, which is a writing collective, but more around instruction. So we teach writing, history, culture. And it's called the Brackish Pond Literary Collective because the first line of Mary Prince's book is, I was born at Brackish Pond. And so Mary Prince for me is, I think for every Bermudian who is connected to our history and culture and traditions in that way, she is the inspiration. She is what moves and drives us to aspire and hopefully inspire as well.
That's deep. That's deep. So I remember being at her statue and hearing a little bit about Mary Prince. And so what would you, for somebody who's never heard, for those, globally who aren't familiar with Mary Prince, what would you want people to know? Like, I'm sure there's many points, but maybe a few bullet points of like, this is why Mary Prince means to us.
So Mary Prince had the story of her life. She narrated it to the Anti-Slavery Society in Britain in around 1829. It was published around 1830. And so she narrated the story of her life, and it's still in print today. And when it was published, it became the first story about a Black woman published in Britain. And it detailed the story of her life, born into slavery around 1785 here in Bermuda. And throughout her life, she had a series of very cruel and sadistic enslavers. And with them, she moved around the world. So she lived in Bermuda, she lived in Antigua, she lived in Turks Island, and then she eventually made her way to England, where she then became free in a way. But in that way, she published her story. So that story of her life and of the violence that she suffered and survived, that story became a galvanizing document for the abolition movement. So when we talk about, the emancipation of enslaved people throughout the British Empire, throughout the colonies, you can tie a direct line to the story that Mary Prince told. Yes, there were, abolitionists and others working in that space, but there was almost like a lack of understanding of how horrific enslavement was without these first person narratives. And so having it was such a powerful document, and her being, brave enough and confident enough to say, like, to them, you should write down my story, you should publish my story. It also, as a Bermudian, and it is important because there has been this sentiment forever that slavery in Bermuda was not as bad as slavery in other countries, right? And understanding and using this story as a narrative that completely turns that ridiculous belief upside down, that the more that we are having that conversation, the more it allows us to be all talking about the same thing. We're all talking about enslavement, and we don't need to have pockets of historians even or tour guides saying something as ridiculous as, slavery in Bermuda was benign or things like that. So it's just a powerful, it's a powerful document. She's an incredible woman, and learning more about her life, beyond the book, sort of using archival documents to understand her a bit more, or think about what her life was like a bit more, is again something that as a writer, as someone who aspires to be an activist, that she used her written word to change the course of history. And so it's also about understanding art as activism, understanding that you're not always, marching in the street or sitting with a minister or, writing laws. You can use your art, you can use your talents to be an activist. And she is the beginning of that history that for Bermuda. She is the beginning of literary activism for this island and for the wider Caribbean. The fact that she left Bermuda, was in Antigua, was in Turks Island, again, it speaks to that diaspora connection. And we in Bermuda have not always been part of that or felt part of that. We excluded ourselves from that, right? Of being part of the Caribbean, even though we are, even if we're not in the Caribbean, we're of the Caribbean. And so, you know, her text being such a seminal text for Bermuda, for the Caribbean, and for the colonies generally, you know, it cements Bermuda's place as well in that history, in a way that not much else has. Or, you know, that document shows that we were all the same, just dropped off in different spots.
Wow.
That the boat just stopped in different spots, right? And
Yeah.
this idea that one island is better than the next or this or whatever, and instead of us being this strong Caribbean community, Bermuda has not really worked to be part of that, has not worked to connect with it in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's hard to say one reason why her book is so important, but it is the foundation for me of it all, of everything.
Now that's powerful. That's really deep. I mean, honestly, and I've always heard powerful and great things about Mary Prince, but I wasn't sure exactly why. So it was never explained in that light. Is it often explained like that in like maybe like academic institutions, or is this part of the self-discovery process?
Definitely self-discovery, and now my life's work, basically, to ensure that people know the name of Mary Prince the same way they know the name of Harriet Tubman. That's the link for me in terms of trying to, you know, you can speak to any 7-8-year-old, even here in Bermuda, and say, you know, oh, have you heard about Harriet Tubman? And invariably they've read about her in school, or they've had a book about powerful leaders, a children's book about leaders, and she's listed, you know, and rightly so, of course.
Absolutely.
I also feel that Mary Prince, with the work that she did as a writer, she also was the first woman, not just Black woman, but the first woman to present a petition to Parliament. You know, she was a trailblazing icon whose life freed us, her life's work and her story, and what she had to go through to even get to that space of being able to write that story down. She had to survive horrors that I could scarcely imagine. So that for me is, you know, in thinking of what I would be happy for people to say of me after I was gone, would be that I was a part of spreading the legacy and the story of Mary Prince across the globe. That would be what I would love for it to be said about me, for sure.
No, that's heavy. That's really heavy. I mean, now that you've given us a lot to think about in terms of like the comparison with Harriet Tubman, and then, you know, the similarities, and then also what it means to be. So, I mean, and it's interesting here in the States, we all have an affinity or an appreciation for our Harriet Tubman and the Harriet Tubman impact in our world, such as, even if we talk about like the, you know, taking a little bit further in history, like the Black Panther Party and the leading ladies of the Black Panther Party. Even we talk about Rosa Parks. And one of the things that I've learned too is that, you know, Black women have always like profoundly led these movements, like undeniably led these movements in ways that, you know, are so very unexpected. So I always really had a healthy appreciation for the Mary Prince story as well.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, you said you were at the Mary Prince statue, but maybe you were at the park, because there's no statue of Mary Prince, but there is a statue of another woman, Sally Bassett, who was an enslaved woman, who her statue, you know, is on the grounds of the House of Parliament because of her incredible rebellion, her spirit of rebellion, and she was looking to poison her granddaughter's enslaver, basically. And so her as well, when, again, leading of what you said, like there is this spirit of resistance, rebellion, revolution, you know, that a lot of Black women around the diaspora have had and have been the leaders of these movements. So I think that's, you know, that legacy as well is something that from even within our group, our Social Justice Bermuda group, when we're constantly trying to figure out, okay, what's next? What's next? It's like, okay, who are we drawing inspiration from today? Who are we thinking about today? Is it the progressive group that led, the theater boycott and the desegregation movement? Is it the Black Beret Cadre, which was basically Bermuda's Black Panther Party? Is it, we have all of these different groups that we can, is it Mary Prince? Is it Sally Bassett? Is it these, who are we? We have these people that have this centuries history of activism, of rebellion, of uprising, and of telling these stories so that people can open their eyes. And so I think that's, for me as well, and for all of us in that space, it's something that we feel quite honored to be even in the conversation of continuing these legacies.
Wow. So wow, brain exploding right now. So you said the Black Beret Cadre.
Yeah. Did John talk to you about the Cadre? He's
Nobody has told me. This is like groundbreaking right now. I know this is going to change the game for everybody. Bermudians had their version of a Black Panther Party, was shaking things up.
Yeah, I mean, even there were Black Power movements throughout the Caribbean, and so I think there's a Black Bermudian academic, Dr. Keto Swan. And he's teaching, he's just moved university, so I can't remember what university he's at now, but he was at Howard.
Okay.
So he, there are a number of Black Bermudian academics who, when you talk about change the game, they have changed the game for how we as Bermudians interact, engage with, and understand our history. Prior to this renaissance over the last sort of 10, 15 years, a lot of the historians and academics studying Bermuda history were white, and the stories of people of African descent were not as documented or studied, researched, etc. Right. So now that has changed, and so we have a number of academics researching Bermuda history, publishing, and lecturing. So incredible. So Dr. Keto Swan, so he wrote the book, the quintessential book about the Black Power movement in Bermuda, called Black Power in Bermuda. And when he lectures as well, one of the things that he talks about is the fact that sort of the propaganda campaign led by like COINTELPRO and other CIA, FBI groups was about making it seem as if there were these ragtag little groups popping up, but it wasn't a coordinated diasporic movement. Yeah. But it was. So, Bermuda's Black Beret Cadre was connected. It wasn't just like, a response to, it was connected to all of the other Black Power groups. And Bermuda hosted the first International Black Congress in 1969, where Black Power leaders from around the diaspora merged here for a conference. And it was under heavy surveillance by CIA, by these other groups. So all that to say, we have a legacy of civil rights that I think even we've forgotten, that we don't even necessarily connect to enough or understand enough. So yeah, as a creative, as a writer, that's one of the things too, right? Is how do we tell Bermuda's stories? How do we tell the stories of our history and culture through art? Because when I think of the stories of the Black Beret Cadre and one of their seminal figures, key figures, which was a man born as Roosevelt Brown, but who changed his name to Pa'alu Kamara Kafego. When I think about like the script based on his life, right? And I'm like, okay, who's playing it? Mahershala Ali? Or, we're having these conversations now because people there's a renewed interest amongst artists, creatives, to learn more history so that they can tell more Bermuda stories, put Bermuda on the page, put Bermuda on the screen. And if we can do that, then the way that Bermuda will be represented outside, the way that the international community will see Bermuda will be more than just tourism.
Right.
And that right now, the way that people think, like you said, it was grass, it was the triangle, it was the Bermuda shorts, like that's what people think. And and that's what it is. Those are the images, right? The images, the pink sand, the beauty. And I am in love with the beauty of this country. I'm in love with, and I feel blessed to be in a paradise like this. And there is another beauty in the culture and the history that is not represented outside of the island, and to an extent had not even been represented on the island. These are things that these are stories that Bermudians don't know, the ones that I'm telling you. So that's for me a part of it. Podcasts like this, talking to journalists and influencers, it is about tourism and travel, because that's my background, that's my business. And I want people to come here, and it's about the people that will maybe never come here, but still can have an understanding of who Bermuda is, who we are, and the role that Bermuda and Bermudians have played over the 400 years, as part of the diaspora. And that's, I think about, you might never go to Nigeria, but you have a sense of Nigeria. If you read certain novelists, if you've watched certain movies, you've never been to Jamaica, but you understand Jamaica. And Bermuda obviously is a speck compared to those nations, but it is through art that we are understanding these places. We're watching films, we're reading books, where, people aren't picking up an academic textbook to learn about Nigeria. They're reading books by, Chimamanda. They're reading books by Marlon James and understanding more about Jamaica. So that's what we need. We need our Marlon James. That's what we're working on as well. So it's tourism and the travel side, and making sure that when people do come here, they're able to tap into this history. They're able to engage with it, understand it. There are tour guides that know it. There are places, there are site names, there are places of memory that are telling these stories. And it's about the millions of other people that will never come to Bermuda. And how will they interact with the history of a Mary Prince or a Black Beret Cadre? How will they learn about the role that Bermuda has played? So I see my career in both of those spaces, for sure.
Absolutely. Wow, that's powerful. That's really powerful. I mean, and you just watched another episode of Fool's Gold TV. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, and watch out for the next new episode. See you soon.